Solar flares, can they affect us physically? Can they affect our energy systems? And if so, are there particular Qigong practices that we should do to help us with that, maybe to help balance us and deal with solar flares? That is going to be the topic of this episode of Chi Life. Okay, so this vlog is in response to a question from, well, both a viewer of the channel and someone who's been doing one of the Long White Cloud Qigong courses recently about solar flares. And maybe that's something that you've heard about, maybe not. Apparently we've been having more of them lately. I didn't double check that. But yeah, if you don't know, you know, our sun is this big molten ball of plasma, and it's super hot. You know, it's got fusion reactions going in, and it's so hot that at its great distance we get heated up, and we get all our visible light from it and so on. And it's not just a still steady ball of this molten plasma. But rather it has currents within it. It moves and it swirls, and sometimes it spurts out from the surface of the sun. I guess kind of like a big fountain, ejecting out from the sun. And when it does this, when some of that substance spurts out, there's also a great release of energy. And so the energy from the sun is not always constant. It's relatively constant, but from time to time there are these stronger bursts of energy that come out of it, and that's called a solar flare. Now, some people, if you think about solar flares, some people will tend to dismiss the idea that could possibly affect us either physically or on a more subtle way, our energy systems. And they would write it off and tend to think of people who think they've been affected by solar flares as it really just being an excuse for other things going on in their life, and looking for something else to pin it on, because maybe actually they're upset about a situation, they've got some emotions and that's affecting their energy, or maybe they ate something bad, but instead of going like, oh, what did I eat last night, they're worried about solar flares, or or things like that. And to be fair, that can be an issue, sometimes looking in the wrong place for what might be affecting us, right? So we need to make sure when we think about things like this, and not just this, lots of other things, that we keep ourselves grounded into what might really be going on and affecting us, but part of that is also keeping an open mind to what could be affecting us. Start with the most simple, the most obvious, and then sometimes we need to look more broadly. So could it be that solar flares affect us, affect our health and how we feel, our energy, our emotions, and so on? Well, if we think about it, these large bursts of energy are strong enough that they affect radio communication on our planet. So they affect that type of energy traveling around the planet, and strong enough that they can also burn out and interfere with sensitive electronics, both, well, on the planet, and more significantly in satellites and things that are outside and orbiting around the planet. So if the energy from a solar flare can affect those sensitive electronic devices, is it unreasonable to think that they could maybe also affect our potentially quite sensitive electrical systems as well? I don't think that's unreasonable to think that at least that could be a possibility. So it's worth paying some attention to and considering that amongst the things that might be affecting you at any given time, particularly if you've already considered the more immediate possible causes. Again, did you get a good night's sleep? Have you drunk enough water? Is the food you're eating good? Do you have any emotional situations going on around you that are affecting you? Have you maybe been exposed to any kind of chemicals or mold or something you might be allergic to? If those things don't account for maybe what you're experiencing, then yeah, there could be, it could be worthwhile to consider if maybe something relating to solar flares might be affecting you. But then the question is, if solar flares are affecting you, what should you do about it? Because again, the sun is, well, it's very, very far away, and the energy it puts out is, well, the solar flares are quite unpredictable, for one, so you don't necessarily know when they're going to come. And the energy it puts out is, it's big. It's affecting all of us all the time. What are you going to do to protect yourself from that? Well, there's a few things. I mean, if you're really concerned about the electromagnetic effects of it, and this is the extreme. I'm saying this more as a hypothetical, rather than maybe something that's going to be practical for most people. You could shut yourself away in a Faraday cage. If you don't know what a Faraday cage is, it's something used for protecting very sensitive electronic instruments. Because sometimes this is necessary just for people doing experiments, and they need to make sure that the equipment they're using isn't affected by other electromagnetic signals around them. They need a space where that's all going to be shut out, so they can make very fine measurements and so on. Or also it's used for protecting electronic equipment against disruption, so that they're not going to be damaged or shut down in an emergency when they're really needed. And this could be in the case of, like, for example, again, this is an extreme, but say an EMP, so an electromagnetic pulse as a weapon. So sometimes they might use an atomic warhead to create an electromagnetic pulse to knock out electronics. Well, that's going to cause disruption. You need a way to protect them. And the way you do this is by creating a cage of conductive material that goes around in all directions around the space you're wanting to protect. And so then as the electromagnetic energy comes in, it essentially gets absorbed into this conductive material, and it gets conducted around rather than through the space in between. And so that's a very effective way of protecting yourself from that. So again, this is more of a hypothetical, you could create a Faraday cage and spend time in that. All right, that's not going to be practical for most of us. Or necessary, I might add. Because we can also look at this some other ways, and in terms of our Qigong practice. So the biggest thing we can do to protect ourselves from the influence of things like solar flares, and not just solar flares, other things that might be going on around us, might be unpredictable, but have potential to affect us, is to strengthen ourselves, strengthen our own energy system, and in particular, for things like this, to strengthen our energy field around us. I mentioned earlier on, when I was talking about sensitive electronics being affected by solar flares, that to some degree it can affect electronic devices, on our planet, but it affects electronics in things like satellites and things orbiting the planet far more. And that is because they are outside of the atmosphere of the planet. And so the atmosphere of our planet actually acts as a shield, as a barrier, a protection, and largely the energy coming in from the solar flare gets absorbed and dissipated within the atmosphere before it gets down too low and can affect things. And so we actually get very little effect from solar flares, unless there's a really, really, really big one. So most of them doesn't affect us much because of the protective nature of the atmosphere. And for ourselves, our energy field functions in largely the same way. When our energy field is strong, it acts as a buffer between us and the other energetic influences around us. And that could be something like solar flares, or it could be something like someone else around us having a bad day and being grumpy and sending out disruptive energy. When our energy field is strong, it acts as a buffer between us, and it helps to dissipate that energy so it doesn't penetrate all the way in and affect us so much. So that's one of the main things we can do. In terms of Qigong practices that can help us with that, well, anything that strengthens the energy field, and lots of Qigong practices potentially can do that. In terms of the long white cloud Qigong practices, for those of you who are familiar with those, Between Heaven and Earth is one that's particularly good for strengthening the energy field. It works with the extraordinary meridians, and as a result of activating those big flows of energy, it then naturally fills out and strengthens our energy field. If you're familiar with the Wuji Qigong practices, just the primal pulse that we do at the beginning of that practice is really good. It's quite gentle, but a gentle way to strengthen the energy field. And then some of the Qigong walking practices also specifically focus out onto strengthening the energy field. So any of those can be good. And then for something even stronger, some of the dragon play practices that we do also, well, they do a couple of things. They strengthen the energy field, but they're also really good for discharging energy. And this is something else that could be relevant in terms of helping you to deal with, if your energy is disrupted by, something like solar flares. And this applies, again, not just to solar flares, but other things that might penetrate into your energy system and disrupt things. One thing is to strengthen that buffer, our energy field. Another is to clear and discharge any disruptive energy, to get it out of our system. And the dragon play practices are really good for that, for discharging and releasing energy. Some other practices that are good for discharging, really simple, some of the movements and towards the end of waking the chi, particularly the thunder and lightning, are really good for discharging energy. Breathing practices in the inner fire breath work, there is the lion's breath, really good for discharging disrupted energy. And there's other practices as well. Those are some of the stronger discharging ones, but there's others that you could use as well. So anyway, hopefully that's a little bit of an interesting topic for at least some people. I know it's something that some people wonder about. And I guess to follow on, to reiterate what I've said earlier, it's not unreasonable to think that solar flares could be affecting your energy. And in which case there are things you can do to strengthen yourselves and to release energy. But for most people, it's unlikely that it's having a big effect on them. It's more likely that other things around them are affecting them more, and they might be mixing up the effect of the solar flares with other things that are going on around them. But again, not something to be discounted completely, and certainly things that you can do to strengthen your energy system to deal with that, and also to deal with those other things that might be affecting you anyway. All right, I hope you've enjoyed the vlog. I look forward to seeing you on another one soon.